Chapter 13. Thorn Apple. Their conspiracy began in earnest the very next day. Gregor took pains to be punctual for his rounds with the novices and his appointments with advisors, especially Felix, in an effort to keep up appearances. But in their spare moments, he and Haille met in the north wing to exchange knowledge. Haille was of the same age as most of the students at Drahlstrom, but he lacked the guile, ambition, and the edge of cruelty that the Servor cultivated in their selection process. It allowed Gregor to enjoy teaching his craft in a way he had not in many years. Haille understood the basics quickly, but with little time to practice, his progress was slow. Gregor began to bring him to sessions with the novices so he could witness further instruction, even if he could not practice. In the afternoon, roles reversed. Gregor and Haille trained with unsharpened swords that Haille had stolen from the armory. Their sessions ended with Gregor panting, his arms aching and his legs trembling, for it was a sort of physical fatigue he had experienced rarely before. Now he welcomed it. Such a contrast it was to the exertions of the mind. Haille's training ran deep, his natural talent even deeper, although he would often bend at the waist, hands on his knees, and lament the decline of his own conditioning and strength. "It has been so long since I practiced," Haille would say. Yet the parries, attacks, down strikes, side strikes, up thrusts, and the flourishes that accompanied them seemed to come so easily to Haille. He executed moves with the grace of a dancer and the certainty of a master instructor. Gregor noticed Haille's disposition brightening, especially in those instances when Gregor was able to exchange a prolonged series of strikes and blocks without faltering. "Well met, apprentice," Haille said after one such exchange of volleys. The phrase struck Gregor, and he laughed. "What is it?" Haille asked, moving to the corner where they had a barrel of rainwater to drink from. He dunked the ladle and lifted it, dripping, to his mouth. "My master says the same thing to me when I have impressed him with a spell or a conjuring." "Funny," Haille said, his mouth puckering as if the water's taste disagreed with him. "So did my sword instructor." "Perhaps mentors are not so different around the world. Haille?" Haille had doubled over, clutching his hand to his throat. He gagged and let out a ragged moan. As he coughed, blood spluttered on his lips. He touched his hand to his mouth, and at the sight of scarlet on his fingers and palms, his eyes grew wide. He dropped to a knee, his face pale, his eyes darting back to the barrel. Poisoned. They had let their guards down. Gregor had been so taken with having a co-conspirator, even a friend, he had forgotten to nurture a healthy distrust. The rain barrel, isolated in the north tower they had assumed was safe, but clearly his enemies had infiltrated even this haven. Haille was his senior and taller, so it took great effort for Gregor to move him, but with Haille's arm across his own shoulder, Gregor carried him to his chamber and let him collapse in his own bed. Gregor brought the chamber pot over, rifled through his own stocks of herbs, roots, and other medicinal plants and fungi. The room rang with the clack of his pestle in his mortar as he mixed an emetic. "We have to get you to vomit what you drank." Haille nodded, coughing into the pot, his hands clutching the rim, the tendons of his neck cording. "Then I'll need to determine what was in the water. It was meant for me, I'm sure." "Both of us," Haille said between hacks. The process of cleaning out Haille's stomach was a painful one that left him trembling as if with a fever. If it was exhaustion or an effect of the poison, Gregor was not sure, but when Haille's fingertips turned a shade of purple and his lips blue, while his eyes became bloodshot and tinged with yellow, Gregor knew. "Are you thirsty?" "Yes," Haille said. "Thorn apple. I know the signs." Gregor's master had taught him how to make the very same poison. It was useful for assassinations, especially because there was no known antidote, at least not medicinal. Gregor raced back to his study, scanned his bookshelves for a seldom-used volume of healing spells. "You always wanted me to be a killer, not a healer," he said as if to his master, taking notice for the first time how the dozens of volumes of spells inflicting pain, wounds, and death outnumbered those of healing. Gregor sighed and picked one of the 3 books of spells for convalescence. Let this be the right one. He worked late into the night, weaving a tapestry of enchantments around Haille, and mixing herbal brews for himself to keep sleep at bay. Gregor realized, with a tightening in his heart, that Haille had become his first real friend. He called on his gifts and pressed himself to unexplored limits in order to influence the battle raging within Haille's twitching, feverish body. The sun had long set, and the candles guttered, but the room was bright with the aura of spells of health and healing that Gregor replenished over Haille's prone shape throughout the night. Still, despite his concoctions, Gregor's mind became addled with sleep in the small hours of the night as he tried to decipher unfamiliar spells and ancient writing. The stars faded, and the waves on the rocks of the isle grew quiet with low tide. Eventually the runes with their flourished serifs blurred before his eyes, and Gregor nodded into sleep. His dreams were a recreation of the very reality he had just endured. In his imagination, Haille still struggled, gasping from the bed, Gregor unable to alleviate his pain. The other men whom they had sent to the seawall gathered at his bedside, the wounds on their backs weeping blood and pus, their hands and feet split with blisters, their faces pale and ghostly, like men who had drowned at sea. They regarded Gregor with pleading eyes. There were so many of them. Behind them waited other men, slaves from earlier seasons, men who had perished from exhaustion, disease, or starvation. Their faces were dry and stretched, and in some places, rot had opened gaping holes in their flesh. Stalking among them was the cat who had died, that had first signaled to Gregor his danger, but the cat turned, twisted up on 2 legs, and all at once, its fur grew dark and long into a cloak. Its eyes shaded to slits of blue, and from a mouth of saber teeth he heard his master speak. Gregor. But Gregor was not his true name. He changed his shape, as an archmage might, and he flew in the form of a sea-hawk over the exposed sandbars, along the leeward side of the island, leaving Drahlstrom behind, a dimple on the surface of the sea. He bent his wings to the rhythm of the winds, soaring above the atolls and archipelagos. Not the razor crags of his prison, but the sun-bathed, terraced hillsides with homes built of mud and wattle and thatch. Homes where families sat around tables and broke crab legs open to eat the steaming meat together, where fishing nets hung on the walls to dry and fires burned in the hearths. This was a place for neighbors and friends, leisure and laughter, not a place of study or ambition, deceit or subterfuge. The sun slanted in through windows, but the lamps were lighted anyway, giving off light, so much light that Gregor could see faces that he recognized. Mother, father. Nathan. My name is Nathan. The sea pressed close, just down the hill from their home, with its smooth walls and swinging shutters, thatch eaves rustling in the wind. The sea was ever present, pressing here too in this steel-gray outpost of guano-stained basalt, where winter clouds scudded, where the blood of slaves stained the rocks, and the morning bell tolled like a dirge. Gregor snapped awake. The room was gray with the weak light of dawn. The morning bell was indeed tolling on the far end of Castle Drahlstrom. He was lucky. The wind was just right that morning, gusting just enough to carry the ringing and not to overwhelm it. He would be expected at the morning assembly. At least he would be by those who had not conspired to poison him. An opportunity occurred to him, in which he might unmask his adversaries simply by noting the surprise on their faces when he did show that morning. But first he turned to Haille. His friend was breathing the deep, slow breaths of sleep. Some color had returned to his face, but the skin beneath his nails was still an unhealthy shade of violet. Gregor was loath to leave him alone in the north wing, knowing that this once inviolate space of his was now compromised. But he knew the importance of keeping to schedule, lest his advisors come looking for him. He changed quickly, his clothes stale from the night before. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes, locked his chamber door behind him, then ran the length of the corridor to the assembly room. He let out a sigh of relief as he slipped in through the side door, smoothing down his doublet, and saw that the room was empty. His advisors, including Felix, were still outside the main doors, which parted and opened just as he sat down in his oversized throne. It was a large crowd that filed in, Gregor noting Felix last, studying his face more than the others for any sign of surprise. It was difficult, for there were strangers present, traders it appeared, seeking an audience. A glance at the southern window of the hall revealed to him a ship's mast that had not been there the day before. Felix was conversing with a tall man with a blonde beard and mustache who wore a long sword and an extravagant leather greatcoat. Gregor was not sure if he imagined it or not, but Felix's eyebrows arched with the slightest hint of surprise. It was fleeting, however, and his chief advisor easily fell into the routine of ceremony. "O great twice-born Lord Lacknor, he who hath conquered death to lead our order. Our shores are graced with the presence of merchants this morning, who offer to do business that might add to our ranks of labor." Gregor did his best to hide behind a mask of inscrutability, studying the flesh trader and the two specimens he pulled forth on a chain. Both slaves held their heads stiffly, with the forced posture of the iron thrall collars around their necks. One was a man with lank hair down to his collar, a scar on his jaw, and the tip of a tattoo showing just below his neck. Next to him, a woman was chained, her hair in tight braids, her skin the comely color of tea with cream. Gregor had heard of dark-skinned people from southern climes, but never had he seen one with his own eyes, or anticipated such beauty. "The man looks to be from good stock, but what do I want with a woman? The kitchens are staffed." "Perhaps as a personal servant," Felix suggested, "to replace your manservant, who seems to be missing." By the look of her stature, her toned muscles, and the hardened expression on her face, Gregor imagined he would end up dead by her hand before the sun rose the next morning. "Perhaps that is just what you want, Felix." "My manservant does not need replacing. He is busy with other duties this morning." Felix's face showed no emotion. "I'm sure she can be of some sort of service," the flesh trader said. His was a broad northern accent. Gregor feigned contempt and turned to Felix. "Who is this stranger who addresses me without introduction or title?" "Apologies," the flesh trader said, casting his bright blue eyes to the floor as he took a knee. He yanked on the chain so that the two slaves did the same. "My name is Twenge, Victor Twenge."